Laika. This is also a graphic novel that's sort of a slightly fictionalized story, but based on a true story of the first dog in space, who was launched into space in Russia. Well, it ends like most dog books do, and that's all I want to say about the animal. But it's a really interesting story, and it's kind of about technology and the space race, and how that also deals with our human concerns on Earth at the same time. This is The Fixer by Joe Sacco. Joe Sacco has done lots and lots of graphic novels, especially about the Middle East. He's done one about Palestine. He's done Sarajevo and that kind of thing. So he covers a lot of pretty tough, pretty war-torn areas. They just have great art. If you're familiar with Robert Crumb, he's got a little bit of a similar style. Maybe not quite as garish at times, but Joe Sacco is a great one to read if you're into travel narratives, especially travel narratives that do with places that you probably won't be going to in your regular life. Changing gears for a second. This is sort of a one-shot graphic novel called Scurvy Dogs. It's just funny. It's very, very funny. It's about pirates. These pirates are out at sea, and then they come back, and it's totally ridiculous. They come back, and they're trying to do things like go on blind dates or apply for a job, and there'll be a scene where it says, "I see here next to marriage status you wrote the sea," that kind of thing. So it's kind of all over the place, very funny. Pyongyang. This is another great nonfiction travelogue sort of graphic novel about a trip to North Korea. The author has written several sort of these things. He does a really good job with graphic novels too, probably because of his background as an animator. Has given him a really good sense of what to do. American Elf. This is actually a sort of a trade paperback. He writes every day. This guy writes one 4-panel comic that describes something that happened in his day. And you can read this online. He posts them daily. But I think the trades are preferable because as you go through, you get a sense of this is 1 year of his life. So it's sort of the compounding all the comics together that gives you the real sort of effect of what he's doing with his project. Jeffrey Brown is one I want to talk about. He's done several autobiographical ones. His most recent, Funny Misshapen Body, is very popular. He's also done some great comedy, especially Incredible Change Bots, which if you're at all familiar with Transformers, I recommend this very highly. It's sort of an homage to Transformers and how that whole thing works. Most famous graphic novel of all time, Mouse. This is a true story. Art Spiegelman interviewed his father and learned about his experiences in the Holocaust. So it's all written in graphic novel format. The sort of conceit is that the Jews are all mice, the Nazis are all cats, and there are some other animals thrown in there as well. But it's a very sort of touching and difficult story, and he sort of told it in a format that's a little more palatable, but it just sort of tricks you into reading it, and then it's still horrifying. It's also the only graphic novel to ever win the Pulitzer Prize. Probably right behind that, most famous, is Persepolis. This is the story of a girl growing up in the Middle East who does eventually come to the United States, how their customs are very different, how they get along over there, and it's also kind of just a growing up memoir thrown in there as well. Fun Home. This has been a recent big hit. This is by Alison Bechdel, who's probably most famous for the comics Dykes to Watch Out For. And it's kind of a story about her growing up with her father. It's sort of a more American version of Persepolis. So if you have big Persepolis fans, this would be a good way to go. Buddy Comics. Buddy does Seattle. We also have Buddy does New Jersey. These are kind of from a very indie comic scene that came about in the 90s. Peter Bagg basically wrote and illustrated these comics, and they would be published in magazines and in zines and that kind of thing. So this is a very indie version of what was happening in comics and sort of the start of creator-owned properties getting big and that sort of thing. Black Hole, Charles Burns. This has sort of woodcut-esque art in it, very detailed and that kind of thing. It's sort of an allegory about sexually transmitted disease, basically. You can see they sort of have a high school yearbook in the front and the same yearbook in the back, but it's pretty they're all sort of mutated. Now, within these universes, kind of ask the question, what if sexually transmitted disease was obvious on someone the moment you looked at them? What would that be? Wilson by Daniel Close. Daniel Close is very famous for 8 Ball, and he did a lot of very personal, very indie sort of projects. It's a pretty dark book. There's a lot of adult content in his books, but there's sort of the big talk in grown-up comics right now is Daniel Close and especially Wilson. Does anybody recognize this guy? No. That's Judd from the Real World, who also married the lady from the Real World. He wrote a graphic novel, and this is one of the first big sort of personal ones called Pedro and Me. Pedro was also on the Real World, you might remember. He had AIDS and did eventually die. And this is sort of an easy Marvel's actually, if you go all the way up, how they met and sort of Pedro's ending. It's a very, very personal sort of book, but it's also got, he has a pretty cartoony style. It can be very funny in places. Judd Winnick's a very good comedic writer. He's also gone to write on a lot of regular comics since then. Okay, American Splendor. This is sort of the king of the indie comic. Harvey Pekar would basically write these comics. A lot of them were very mundane. A lot of them tried to reveal sort of truths within the mundane. Completely random sort of assortment of artists. You know, you flip from one page to the next and it's a completely different artist. This also, I think, is one of the better comic movies. If you watch it, it kind of deals with comics and that kind of thing. Great stories. And we're almost done. Best American Comics. This is a good collection if you're really interested in what's out there in terms of smaller presses, things that you're not going to find at your Borders and Barnes & Noble necessarily. If you decide to read Best American Comics to get an idea of what's going on, take it with a grain of salt. They sort of err on the side of being very indie as opposed to mainstream. They want to introduce people to things that are not mainstream. So if you read this and you find yourself reading something you don't like, skip to the next thing. All right, let's do a quick talk about some Japanese comics. Akira. This is also a very big, famous anime. This is one of my personal favorite Japanese comics. Part of what's really good about this, if you're just getting into Japanese comics, it's read in traditional American fashion, so from left to right, top to bottom, so you don't have to worry about reading it backwards. I think there are 5 or 6 volumes of this, so it's a really long, involved story. Lone Wolf and Cub. These tiny little guys who might be totally ruining your shelves at your library, or in our case, all went missing one day and have never returned. But this is also left to right format. This is about a wandering samurai who, inexplicably, they don't really go into it, has a baby with him. And so, oftentimes he uses the baby to set traps for people he's trying to attack and that sort of thing. Initial D. Now this is a backwards comic. So when you get this, start on this side. Well, no, start on this side. If you start on this side, it says, stop, this is the back of the book. And it gives you a little primer on how to read it, which you can refer to. This is a story about car racing in Japan. Great for your fans of Fast and the Furious and that sort of thing, your gearheads, that sort of person. Uzumaki, which I think means spiral. Crazy horror sort of comics. Very sort of graphically frightening, very nightmarish. So if you have people who are into horror, especially Japanese horror like The Ring, The Grudge, that sort of thing, this is a really good place for them to go. Slam Dunk. This doesn't seem like it'd be good. It's basically a comic about a basketball team. Great, fantastic, good sports action, good team dynamics and that kind of thing. The comic format works really well to sort of express the action of a sports game or a sporting event. So if you have sports fans, that's a really good place to send them. One Piece, this is sort of a comic Japanese Indiana Jones, is the best way I can describe that. Sort of treasure hunting. This kid accidentally touches something he's not supposed to and turns his whole body into what is basically rubber.
Whoa.
And other than that, it's kind of a normal treasure hunt story with, of course, very bizarre things thrown in. That's all I brought. I also wanted to tell you about Shonen Jump and Shoujo Beat. These are sort of monthly books that we get. This is the closest thing we get to subscription comics in terms of Japanese comics. The difference is, like Shonen Jump will be like this thick, but it has probably 10 or 15 different comics. So the way they publish their comics in Shonen Jump is they'll say, we'll have these 10 titles and we publish one piece of them each month. So you get a lot of different stuff in the same book. So it's kind of a cool way to look at a lot of Japanese comics.
Just an update though on that, Peter. I think they ceased publication on Shoujo Beat.
I heard that as well.
Shoujo Beat.
Yeah, so we no longer available.
Well, sorry guys. And this is also, you have the two kinds of Japanese comics. Shonen are traditionally boy comics, more action-oriented. Shoujo are kind of romance, drama, soap opera-y more comics. And so, a lot of times they make the distinction boy and girl comics. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I've especially found a lot of boys who read the romancy sort of comics. So take from that what you will. That's the end of the slideshow.
Awesome.
Anyone have any questions?
Yes. Actually, I'm just curious.